What Remains of Edith Finch is a narrative adventure game that tells the story of the Finch family. You play as Edith Finch, a 17-year-old girl returning to her abandoned family home for the first time in several years. Edith has returned with the intention of learning more about her family. This is a game mostly about death, and along with it, the game addresses topics like mental illness, generational traumas, and embracing mortality. I went into this game knowing very little about it, and I think that is the absolute best way to experience the game. The game can be completed in just 2.5 hours, but there is so much to unpack with the story. It is one of the saddest games I've ever played, but I also really enjoyed everything the game has to offer. The game is set on Orcas Island in Washington State, a place not far from where I grew up. The ferry boat and pine tree forests immediately made me feel like I was back in my hometown. The whimsical Finch house looks inviting and eerie all at once. I was not prepared for the stories that would unfold inside. Before entering the house, all we really know is that Edith's brother, Milton, vanished when he was 4. She also tells us that she lived in the house until she was 11 and hasn't been back since her brother Lewis's funeral. At the start of the game, we see that Edith is keeping a journal about the family, and throughout the game, we hear her read her journal entries, with these words appearing physically in the world. There is plenty of environmental storytelling, from the calendars on the walls to the book titles all over the rooms, and the decorations in each room. Video game critic John Mulholland explains that environmental storytelling helps make players active participants in the storytelling rather than passive viewers. The level design is so beautiful and mysterious, it makes you want to take a closer look at everything. The game's mechanics are pretty simple. The core mechanic is walking around and interacting with items. Some items need to be interacted with the right combination of keyboard or mouse movements that make sense for the situation. For example, opening a book requires holding A like you are pulling the book cover to the left. Winding up a music box requires cycling through WASD like a spinning motion. The game doesn't explain any of the controls, but it is straightforward enough to figure out. It doesn't have traditional win-lose scenarios. There is no combat, no leveling up, and barely any UI. The only goal is to explore and interact with items. And yet, the game has some of the most clever and unique mechanics when it comes to the family members' stories. I can't praise enough how beautifully done these mechanics are and how much they add to the story being told. The first family member story we experience is Molly. When entering the Finch house, we notice that all the doors have been sealed shut, but they each have peepholes that reveal perfectly preserved rooms. Through hidden passageways, we are able to explore the rooms. Molly's room is that of a 10-year-old girl. We can explore her room, and when we discover her diary, we learn that it says she will be gone soon, but she wants to explain what happened to her. She writes that her mother sent her to bed without dinner. She was so hungry that she started eating things around her room that weren't even food. The gameplay that follows is her transforming into a cat and chasing after a bird to eat. She then transforms into an owl, a shark, and finally a monster. The mechanics change from jumping around a tree as a cat to flying as an owl, swimming as a shark, and crawling around as a monster. The gameplay truly feels like a child's imagination running wild. It allows for some interesting gameplay dynamics as well. You can be a quick and ruthless predator, or you can take your time enjoying each change of scenery. The game developers knew that players would play differently because there are even Steam achievements for catching 2 rabbits in just 2 swoops as an owl, or pausing to listen through a drunken sailor's song before eating him as the monster. The story sequence ends with Molly back in her own body and the monster now under her bed. She is writing in her diary knowing that she will be eaten by this monster. This leaves a lot of questions for the player. This story was perhaps the most unclear about what really happened. There is a common theme with each family member that they have a warped sense of reality. Molly ate things in her room that might have poisoned her. Maybe in a delirious state she imagined being all of these animals. After the story, Edith sketches a picture of Molly in the family tree she drew in her journal. The pause menu is a clever use of UI that shows this family tree. In it, we see that many of the family members died young. We continue to explore the house and discover Edie and Sven's room. Edith is named after her great-grandma Edie. We learn more about the family's history. Edie's father, Odin, had brought her and her husband to America from Norway. Odin wanted to escape what he said was a family curse. Edie believes this curse is what causes the untimely deaths of everyone in the family. Edie is obsessed with memorializing the family members. This is why every room is perfectly preserved. We explore the rooms of a couple of Edie's other children. Barbara's story sequence is set in a comic book. The player plays as Barbara through the comic panels. Barbara is believed to have been killed by a Michael Myers-type killer. Her younger brother Walter hid under his bed and heard his sister's murder. He is forever traumatized and disappeared from the family. Although we learn that Edie hid him in the basement where he lived isolated and afraid for 30 years. During his story, we have to repeatedly open cans of peaches. This gameplay helps us feel the monotony that he felt every day. He lives in fear of a monster he feels shaking the house every day. Eventually, he does leave the basement and says that he would be happy with only one day of freedom. This freedom is short-lived because he is hit by a train. This could be the monster that he thought was lurking outside, shaking the house. Walter had become too traumatized to think rationally. Edie might have given up on him ever overcoming his trauma, or maybe she didn't want him to recover. She might have been unwilling to risk losing another child, so she thought it would be better to keep him hidden away because of the family curse. There is a story sequence with very unique gameplay, and that is Lewis's story. Lewis is Edith's older brother, and Edith finds a letter from his psychiatrist to their mother. In it, the letter explains his mental state leading up to his death. He was 22 and working at a fish cannery. He was struggling with drug addiction and finding his purpose in life. All during this explanation, we are playing as Lewis at the cannery, chopping the heads off of fish. His psychiatrist describes the daydreams he would have during work, imagining himself exploring as a D&D style character. Slowly, the fantasy world takes over the screen, and you are making story-based decisions and becoming king of the fantasy world. The gameplay perfectly complemented what was happening to Lewis. The player is in control of two different worlds at once. You can move the mouse and continue chopping fish in the real world, and the keyboard to control movement in the fantasy world at the same time. Trying to control both at once truly gives the player the sense of being in two worlds at the same time. Lewis completely loses his grip on reality, and his story ends in an accidental suicide. In the book, The Ethics of Computer Games, author Sicart explains that the game passage creates a moral and philosophical game experience. This is also true of What Remains of Edith Finch. Both games are an experience of memento mori. The game requires the player to make a lot of uncomfortable choices that will result in the characters dying. There isn't an option for the characters to not die, it's just a part of progressing through the game. The characters' death all serve a purpose in the story. By going through these difficult stories, the game hopes to cause the player to reflect on their own attitude towards death. The game rewards the player with progress. Each family member's story uncovered is another portrait sketched in Edith's journal, and getting her that much closer to her goal of documenting the family history. The gameplay is about exploring difficult truths. The story tells us about a family that was trapped by their own fears and traumas. Each family member had strong imaginations and dreams, but felt limited by reality in a way that was unbearable. It's a theme that is reiterated throughout the game, and we see foreshadowing for it early on. The book Interactive Stories and Video Game Art mentions the practice of planting objects in film production. This is a way of casually presenting an object or information that will take on a central role in the narrative later. We see this with the dining room when we first enter the house. Edith mentions that it is still a wreck from the night she left. Near the end of the game, we see how Edie and Dawn argued at the dining table, which results in a messy situation where her mother takes her to live away from the house. The bird cages we see in Edie's room are symbolic of how each family member felt trapped in life. Even the family name, Finch, suggests that the family were like birds, meant to fly free. What Remains of Edith Finch succeeds at telling us a complicated family story. I believe it follows the triangle of weirdness principle, which is explained in the book Level Up, The Guide to Great Video Game Design. This is a narrative guide for game developers that states you can only choose one of the 3 principles to be truly weird. The game's world is normal, and the characters are normal by outward appearances, but the activities that take place in the game are quite weird. It is up to the player to decide if the family curse is something supernatural or just a superstition. Edie tried to preserve her family history and always warn everyone of the family curse. In opposition, Edith's mother, Dawn, tried to shut out the past and shelter her children from the cruel realities. I think Edie and Dawn serve as cautionary tales when it comes to accepting death. It's important to embrace mortality, but you cannot let yourself be consumed by grief and fear. We should be grateful for the life we are given and live it to the fullest.